Hey everyone, this is Eddie and I want to welcome you to question 1 of the California bar exam that was administered in July of 2017. So before we start, I want to say that this will be graded on the curve grading scale. So if you did not exactly mention all of these elements, that's going to be fine. It's going to depend on how many people what they actually wrote down. Now, there is a lot of new law that did not appear on past exams, so I'm sure that's going to throw a lot of people off. And mentioning new law is just a way of it's just how the new bar exam is evolving, and that's something that I didn't mention in a video that I made before the July exam was administered. So let's go ahead and go to question number 1, and it asks, what are Hal's and Wanda's rights and liabilities, if any, regarding the condo? So let's talk about that condo that was inherited by Hal. So the presumption is that property that is inherited is going to be separate property. And of course, you have to look at the actions of the parties to see if there was a change in character. And here there were many actions. So the title of the condo did change from sole ownership to joint tenancy. And of course, that's called a transmutation. Everybody here knows that. And that's usually done through a deed for real property. If it's done through a deed, that is okay. But something was off about Wanda. Did you guys notice that? Her behavior, her demeanor, there was just something sneaky about her. Like she was up to something. So then as I was writing this, I said, hey, did she take unfair advantage of him? And that's something that is going to be considered. So there's 2 possible outcomes here. So there can be a showing of undue influence. And also there can be no showing of undue influence. So then the question is this: was the interspouse transfer, was that the product of undue influence? And there's a case in California with the same exact issue, and it has many of the same facts, and that's called Henry, the marriage of Delaney. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about that. So in transactions between spouses, there must be good faith and fair dealing on the part of each spouse, and neither party shall take any unfair advantage of the other. So there are some factors that the party can use to overcome that presumption. For example, whether it was a transfer that was freely and voluntarily made with full knowledge of all the facts and with complete understanding of the legal effect. So let's see what Wanda can say. So as far as the transaction being freely and voluntarily made, so the facts do state that Wanda influenced Hal. To what extent, we do not know. So that could go either way. And was the transaction made with full knowledge of all the facts? Now, Hal did not know all of the facts to his financial situation. Why was that? That was because Wanda did not disclose that separate account. And that separate account could have been community property. So I think that's going to hurt Wanda. And also, it does seem as if Hal is not really financially sophisticated compared. That's the key word, compared to Wanda, because she's not only is she an accountant, but she's a successful accountant. So, and also remember that Wanda also managed the finances for the couple. So it does seem as if Hal did not make that transaction with full knowledge of all the facts. Was it made with complete understanding of the legal facts? Now, Hal did think that it was made to avoid probate. So that could hurt Wanda. What's the conclusion? That's something you had to examine and to analyze. So here you could have 2 outcomes. You could have said, okay, there is undue influence, and if that happens, the interspousal transfer deed is void, and the condo would be Hal's separate property. On the other hand, you could say that it was a valid transmutation, and if you say that, and then the condo is now characterized as community property, and of course that would trigger a discussion of Lucas and anti-Lucas. So in that sense, the disposition would be as such: Hal would be entitled to reimbursement for the purchase of the condo, which would be $250,000. And as for any appreciation, it would still be community property, and each party would have 1/2 interest in the appreciation value. So that's question number 1. Let's move on now to question number 2. Question number 2 reads, what are Hal's and Wanda's rights and liabilities, if any, regarding the motorcycle? Okay, so let's consider the source. So there you had 2 sources. You had $10,000, or 50% of the total of $20,000, and that came from Hal's inheritance. And also you had a $10,000 loan, and that came from a joint account. It was paid by the couple's joint account. Let's talk first about the inheritance, the separate property of Hal. So that's half of the total. So that's probably likely to stay as his separate property. Let's talk about the loan now. So that joint bank account. So of course the court is going to trace the funds. And if there's a contribution made by the community, and then the community may be entitled to reimbursement. So Wanda may be entitled to some type of reimbursement here. Let's continue. Where the funds co-mingled. Now, if the funds were co-mingled, and I think they were in this case, and then that usually converts to community property. So it does seem like the $10,000 that the community will have some type of interest there. Hal's counter argument. Hal's gonna say, okay, look, the lender relied on my outstanding credit history. But that's actually gonna hurt Hal, because if the lender relies on a party during the marriage, it's gonna become community property. And Hal's gonna say, hey, but it was in my name alone. Of course, that will not overcome the determination present when the parties trace the source of the funds. So as for the disposition of the loan, it seems like it came from community property assets. And if that happens, then each party will be entitled to a reimbursement of 50%. So Wanda will be entitled to a reimbursement of $5,000 for the motorcycle. Let's go on to question number 3. What are Hal's and Wanda's rights and liabilities, if any, regarding the camper van? Let's go to that camper van now. So of course the presumption is that if it's acquired during the marriage, and then it belongs to the community. So here, it seems as if community property will be the proper classification. Let's look at the actions of the parties to see if there was a change in character of the assets. So Hal's gonna say, hey, it was a gift. And if it's a gift, that can change the character of the property, but if the gift has a substantial value, then it must be in writing, and there must be a valid transmutation, and there was no writing here. And also there was commingling of the funds, because yes, even though Wanda gave him the gift, the funds that she used to pay for it came from that account that was shared by both parties. So it looks like it will be treated as community property. And Hal's gonna say, wait a minute, but the title was in my name alone. And of course, we already know that the court is gonna trace the funds to determine the classification. And as for the disposition, the camper van will probably be treated as community property. Let's go on to question number 4. What rights and liabilities in the A1 bank account? So a presumption of community property, because it was during the marriage. Actions of the party. The name on the account, one that's gonna say, hey, it's only my name, but of course that's not gonna change the character. We discussed that above. And also what you had here, you had concealment of the funds. And I'm gonna talk about this very briefly because I'm running out of time here. So Wanda did not disclose the account to Hal. Hal had to discover it. So that may trigger a discussion of breach of fiduciary duties and remedies. However, Hal did discover before the final hearing, before the judgment was entered. So that's not gonna be an issue here. The disposition, the remedies for breach of fiduciary duties not likely to be awarded. And the A1 bank account will be classified as community property. So I want to wish everybody all the best. I hope you passed. Until soon.